As I stood there, admiring my bullseye shot, a thought occurred to me. One that I simply hadn't considered, and the words that my mother spoke to me came back again. There are those in this world that will expect to see you fail. Not just expect it. Some will actually want it. The fact that my archery teacher never told me about reading the environment or judging distance and the math behind it. The fact that in the 3 months' time that I spent training under my archery teacher, not once, not one single time has he ever asked me to check the sight on my bow. I clasp the bow tightly in my grip. My jaw tenses tightly. Why would he? It doesn't make any sense. What would he have to gain from it? And finally, the realization that, in fact, my archery teacher had not truly been trying to teach me archery. I stood there for a moment, bow in my grasp. The wind kicked up a little, a few leaves rolling by. All the while, a single word rolled in my head. Why? Well, are you ready for your lesson, Mr. Worthington? I hear announced from behind me. I know the voice. I turn to see the archery teacher approaching, his dull gray attire, all prim and proper as they should be. Adjusting his glasses as he approaches, ensuring his hair and mustache is properly maintained, even outside. An old but stout man with graying hair. His dour expression never changing, as if every moment of his life is a serious affair. I felt angry, but tried to maintain an outward appearance of calm, loosening my grip, trying to make sure that my jaw did not clench. Okay, I thought to myself, I have a theory, so let's test it. Yes, instructor, I replied. I've actually been doing a bit of practice. I think I've gotten quite good, I said to the instructor as he came to the archery range, standing beside me, taking his usual position. Well, I certainly would hope so, young Mr. Worthington, the instructor replied. As of yet, I fail to even be able to call your performance thus far subpar. Oh, it's no problem, instructor. I'm sure you'll be proud of my improvements, I said. Well then, the archery teacher replied, let us see this improvement you speak of. Draw your bow. I stared down the range for a moment, beginning to take my read. Chop chop. Any time now, young man, the instructor said, barking. And just as before, I followed the same processes, reading the environment, measuring the distance, and finally the shot. And just as before, right to the bullseye. I looked over to my instructor, my eyes glancing to the side, trying not to look directly at him. His expression was unchanged, holding his serious demeanor, his stance, hands firmly tucked behind his back. Well, I see there has been some improvement, he replies. But let us ensure that we are not just getting lucky. Try again, Mr. Worthington. And so I did. And once again, the arrow hit its mark. Once again, my eyes glance over, checking my instructor's expression. And for a moment, and only for a moment, I see a slight pressing of his lips, as if he felt frustrated or upset. Well, you've made quite a marked improvement, I see, he says, straightening his beard once again. Why don't we try the next target out? See how you fare. So we began stepping to the right, moving further towards the longer range shot. After taking my position in front of the target, I followed the same processes, released my arrow. This time, no bullseye. My shot landed the third ring out. Well, the instructor replied, it appears you still have some things to learn, Mr. Worthington. I don't understand. I followed the same processes. Why didn't it hit? Perhaps a longer range was a bit too much for you. We could move back down to the shorter distance target, if you wish. I looked over at him, trying to contain my frustration in the moment. Why didn't it hit? I thought to myself. And then it occurred to me that I was still accounting for the wind the same way I was for the shorter distance target. If the target's farther away, it only makes sense that the wind has longer to push the arrow. So I need to adjust, I thought to myself. Don't worry, So, repeating the process, taking into account the wind over a longer distance, I took my second shot, and right on the mark, bullseye. Again, once more my eyes slide over, trying to glance at my instructor. This time, he looked even more perturbed. That settles it. There's no question about it anymore. He wasn't teaching me anything. Just like so many others, he wanted me to fail. Well, Mr. Worthington, the instructor said, you haven't been holding out your archery talents on me, have you, young man? I did my best to keep from scowling at him. No, instructor. I was recently at a party. A friend of mine gave me some helpful pointers on archery. They seem to be working out quite well, I said, still trying to contain my anger at the moment. Well then, since you are making such remarkable progress, the instructor replied, slightly pulling at his mustache, the gray hairs winding in between his fingers. Perhaps we should make things a little more difficult. Come, he said, as he turned around and began to walk farther down the archery range. I assumed heading for the next target. I began following him, and I started to slow as we approached the next target. However, the instructor didn't stop. He continued walking forward. At the moment, I had already started to get ready for my next shot. I had to lower my bow and continue to follow him. To my surprise, he not only bypassed the next target, but the one after that, and the one after that as well, moving all the way to the last target in the field, the furthest shot that you could actually make on our archery range. Well, young Mr. Worthington, perhaps you should give this shot a try. Let's see how you fare, he said. This time, I could see a slight grin on his face. He didn't think I could make that shot. He didn't want me to. This little move was nothing more than his effort to put me in my place. I stared down the archery range, looking at the target far into the distance. It was so far away. Could I even make that shot? Could I even hit the target? I glanced over at my instructor, the sly grin still on his face. This time, I don't think I was able to contain my scowl. I was angry, infuriated in fact, and once again, my mother's words creeped into my mind. It is not fair to expect perfection from anyone, but from us, and us alone, it is demanded. Remember this always, Reginald. As unfair as it is, as unjust as it is, we and we alone must fight, even for what is rightfully ours. A fire burns in my stomach. At this exact moment, I want nothing else in the entire world but to wipe the smile from his face. If hitting that target, no matter the distance, is how I achieve that, then that is exactly what I'm going to do, what I will do. I spent some time staring down the range at the target, feeling the slight breeze creep by, watching the leaves roll across the ground. The target seems so far away, but it doesn't matter. I raise my bow, glaring down the archery range, my gaze upon the target, intense, focused. I feel the wind against my face as I draw the string back. I can feel my heart beating in my chest. I take a deep, long breath, calming myself. My heart thumps away. Thump, 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 thump. And suddenly, I feel it begin to slow. Thump, 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 thump. My eyes focused on the target at hand. And as I exhale, for a moment, and only just a small moment, it was if my heart simply stopped beating. I release the arrow. It arches upward, flying down the range. I still can't feel my heartbeat. It seems like everything is slowed down, like I can actually follow the arrow. And as the arrow strikes the target, I feel it again. My heartbeat, breath returns to me. I breathe deeply. I lower my bow, gazing down the range, the last target on the bullseye. I look over to my instructor. I smile, looking up at him, adjusting his shoulders, his arms clenching much more tightly behind his back, and the look of displeasure on his face, ever more pleasant, to me at least. Well, the instructor says, it seems you have made a remarkable improvement in your archery abilities. You should be quite proud of yourself, he says, reaching forward and adjusting his short tie. Now, let us continue. Perhaps some of the shorter range targets this time. And so, we spent the next hour bouncing back and forth between different targets. My focus was intense, my eyes unflinching, and my marksmanship perfection. At one point, the instructor even told me to take a short break, go get myself something to drink, and after returning and reacquiring my bow, I found the sight had been moved. I simply looked at the bow. I saw the direction he moved the sight to, and where it had originally been placed. By judging the distance between the two, I didn't even need to move the sight back. I simply drew a line in my mind of where the original sight was placed. The look of displeasure on my archery teacher's face as I hit the bullseye after he changed where the sight was located was ever so satisfying. After my archery lesson had come to its conclusion, we returned to the house, my mother, of course, stopping to ask how the lesson had gone. Well, Mrs. Worthington, the archery teacher replied, your son seems to have made marked improvement in his archery abilities. It appears he may have some talent with a bow after all, he said, maintaining his serious and dour expression. I'm sure his father will be quite pleased to hear this, he said, as he began to make his way out the front door. My mother seemed overjoyed. A smile creeped across her face as she waved the instructor goodbye as the door closed. Very good, Reginald, she said, looking down at me. I am glad to hear that you are making good strides in archery. Yes, Mother, I replied. So, our day continued. I finished off most of my other studies of mathematics and science, shortly after which my mother and myself sat down for dinner. My mother and myself taking the seats at the far left end of the dining table in the grand dining hall. A fine chicken soup was prepared, and for a while we simply sat there eating our dinner, about halfway through my bowl of soup. Mother, I exclaimed, lifting the spoon from the bowl, filled with warm soup, simply watching little wisps of steam rise from it. Yes, Reginald, my mother replied, looking over at me, stopping her eating for a moment. I remembered what you told me before, I said, still staring vacantly into the spoon, steam rising from it. You were right, Iris said. There are so many people in this world who simply want to see us fail. Those that would see us fail would even spend their own time and energy to assure it, even if it's of no profit to them at all. Even if they're being paid to do something, as long as you don't know any better, they'll still try to swindle you, to steal away your time, your effort, your opportunities, even when it's of no benefit to them whatsoever. It's utter foolishness, I said, dumping the spoonful of soup back into the bowl. If one thing has become perfectly clear in anything at all, it's that if I want to overcome them, if I want to wipe the smiles from their faces, I must be superior. There is no other option, I said, watching the final drop of soup teeter-totter before falling off the spoon back into the soup. I looked over to my mother, a serious expression on my face. Believe me, I will be. For a moment, my mother's expression was that of surprise. Her eyes widened, her mouth hung open ever so slightly, and then her expression softened. She stood up from her chair, moving it back, and gently walked over towards me. She placed a single hand on the side of my face, very gently, and with a soft, kind expression, she looked me directly in the eyes. Reginald, already are superior, she said. You, my son, are gifted, truly gifted. I've known it since the moment you were born. You have a great destiny before you. Her hand moved gently from my face to my shoulder. Her expression grew harder, more intense. Reginald, the only matter that has ever been in question is whether you would prove that you are superior. Yes, Mother, I replied. She reached down and hugged me tightly, and then made her way back to her seat, and we continued dinner in a peaceful silence. I would occasionally look over and see a slight smile on her face as she continued her supper, and without question, I had one as well. I do in fact think that is the happiest dinner I have ever had in the Worthington household. So the time ticked by. After dinner, we spent some time relaxing, reading books, but mostly my mind was on other things. Primarily, I needed a plan. No business venture is ever complete without a plan of action. One must have a goal and a means of acquiring that goal. There would be no more half-hearted attempts from me. After some time relaxing by the fire, we each took our leave. I headed towards my room to get some much-needed rest from the day. I entered my room and began to start getting undressed, beginning with unbuttoning my shirt, one button at a time, and it was about the time I reached the third button